Why does an insult from third grade still sting harder than one from last week? Why do some people flinch at raised voices, apologize for things that aren't their fault, or feel their stomach drop every time a phone buzzes with a new notification? The answer isn't personality. It's not weakness. It's what happens when a developing brain spends years being told over and over that it isn't safe. Bullying. Bullying isn't a single mean comment or one bad day at school. It's chronic stress delivered in small, repeated doses. And repeated stress doesn't just hurt your feelings, it physically rewires the brain. Your brain is built to adapt to its environment. If that environment is a hallway where you never know who's going to target you next, your brain adapts to that. It builds itself around threat. And once it's built that way, it doesn't automatically rebuild itself just because you grow up and leave. Here's what actually happens inside the brain. Deep in your skull sits a small, almond-shaped structure called the amygdala, your brain's alarm system. Its job is to scan every situation for danger and react before you've even consciously registered what's happening. In a normal environment, that alarm stays quiet most of the time. But when a child is bullied repeatedly, the amygdala starts firing constantly. Every hallway becomes a potential threat. Every group of laughing classmates might be laughing at you. Over months and years, the amygdala doesn't just react more, it grows more sensitive. It gets better at its job, which sounds good, except its job is detecting danger that may not even be there anymore. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for reasoning, calming you down, and putting things into perspective, doesn't develop the way it should. In a healthy nervous system, the prefrontal cortex acts like a brake pedal on the amygdala's alarm. But under chronic stress, that brake pedal gets weaker while the alarm gets louder. The result is a brain that's stuck in a permanent state of high alert long after the bullying has stopped. You're not imagining it when a raised voice makes your whole body tense. Your nervous system genuinely believes it's still in that hallway. There's also a hormone involved in all of this, cortisol. Every time you're bullied, your body releases cortisol to help you deal with the perceived emergency, faster heartbeat, tighter muscles, sharper senses. That's useful for a single dangerous moment. But bullying isn't a single moment. It's a pattern that repeats for months or years, which means cortisol stays elevated far longer than it's supposed to. Chronically high cortisol has been linked to shrinking in the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for memory and learning, which is part of why bullied kids often struggle to concentrate in class even when nothing else in their life has changed. Their brain, quite literally, is spending its resources on survival instead of on schoolwork. This is where hypervigilance comes from. Hypervigilance is your brain constantly scanning for threat, even in completely safe situations. You walk into a room and instantly clock everyone's facial expressions. You replay a coworker's tone of voice for hours, searching for hidden judgment. You can't relax at a party because some part of you is still waiting to be laughed at. People call this being sensitive or overthinking, but it isn't overthinking. It's a survival system doing exactly what it was trained to do, protecting you from a threat that used to be everywhere and now might be nowhere at all. Hypervigilance is exhausting precisely because it never clocks out. Even in your own bedroom alone, your nervous system can still be quietly bracing for impact. Bullying doesn't just change how your brain scans for danger, it changes how you see yourself. When you're repeatedly targeted, especially as a child, your brain doesn't conclude that the bullies are the problem. It concludes that you are. This is called internalization, and it happens because a child's brain is still learning who they are by absorbing what other people say and do to them. If the message you receive, day after day, is that you're weird, or worthless, or a target, your developing sense of identity gets built on top of that message. You don't just experience bullying, you become shaped by it. Years later, you might not remember the specific insults, but the core belief they planted, that something is fundamentally wrong with you, can still be running quietly in the background of every decision you make. It shows up as the voice that says you don't deserve the promotion, the friendship, or the compliment someone just gave you. That belief often shows up as people-pleasing. When you grow up being punished socially for standing out, your brain learns a simple rule: don't give people a reason to target you. So you shrink, you agree when you disagree, you apologize first, even when you did nothing wrong. You read a room before you've even said hello, calculating what version of yourself will keep you safest. Psychologists call this fawning, a survival response where you try to appease a threat instead of fighting or fleeing it. As a kid surrounded by people who could hurt you and that you couldn't escape, fawning made sense. It kept you safe. The problem is, your brain never got the memo that you're not in that hallway anymore. So it keeps fawning in relationships, at work, with friends, anywhere it senses the faintest possibility of rejection. You might find yourself saying yes to plans you don't want, laughing at jokes that hurt, or staying quiet in meetings even when you have the right answer, all because some old part of you is still avoiding a target on your back. Trust becomes complicated too. If the people who were supposed to be your peers spent years making you feel unsafe, your brain learns a painful lesson early: closeness can be dangerous. So even when you meet genuinely kind people as an adult, some part of you stays braced for the moment they turn. You might test people without realizing it, push them away before they can reject you first, or feel a low hum of suspicion even in relationships with no red flags at all. This isn't a character flaw. It's a brain doing exactly what it learned to do to survive, applied to a world that no longer matches the one it learned it in. You might catch yourself waiting for the other shoe to drop in a perfectly healthy friendship, not because anything is wrong, but because peace itself can feel unfamiliar and even suspicious to a nervous system that equates calm with the quiet before something bad happens. Social anxiety often traces back to this exact history too, and it's worth separating from ordinary shyness. Shyness is discomfort in new situations that usually fades once you warm up. Social anxiety rooted in bullying is different. It's a specific fear of being watched, judged, and found lacking, because for years being watched actually did lead to being judged and found lacking. Walking into a cafeteria, a classroom, or years later a meeting room can trigger the same bracing response as walking into that old hallway. Heart rate up, face flushing, mind scanning every face for signs of ridicule. Public speaking becomes uniquely terrifying, not because of the content you have to say, but because standing in front of a group used to be a genuine setup for humiliation. Your body remembers that association even after your mind has logically moved on. This is why some people can be articulate, confident, and completely at ease one-on-one, yet feel their whole nervous system seize up the moment more eyes turn toward them at once. It isn't a contradiction. It's a very specific, very learned fear, doing exactly what it learned to do. Perfectionism often grows out of the same soil. If you were bullied for something about yourself, your body, your voice, your interest, your brain may have concluded that being flawless was the only way to avoid being targeted again. So you over-prepare. You rehearse conversations before they happen. You can't let a mistake go, because a mistake once meant public humiliation, and your nervous system still remembers the stakes as being that high. Perfectionism isn't about wanting to succeed. Underneath it, it's often about wanting to disappear from anyone's radar for long enough to feel safe. Every typo you agonize over, every email you reread 5 times can trace back to a much younger version of you who learned that being noticed at all was dangerous. Not everyone responds to this rewiring the same way. Some people become hypervigilant and anxious, scanning constantly for threat. Others go the opposite direction and shut down entirely, a pattern called avoidance. If speaking up, standing out, or being noticed once led to pain, your brain might decide the safest option is to disappear. You stop raising your hand in class, you take the quiet job instead of the one you actually want. You avoid parties, avoid conflict, avoid anything that might put you back in the spotlight, because the spotlight is where the danger used to live. From the outside, this can look like laziness or lack of ambition. From the inside, it's a nervous system doing everything it can to stay small enough not to be a target again. Anger is part of this picture too, though it often gets buried. Bullying frequently happens in front of adults who don't intervene, or peers who watch and say nothing, which teaches a child a second painful lesson. Not only are you unsafe, but no one is going to protect you. That combination, unsafe and unprotected, often turns anger inward instead of outward. Instead of getting mad at the people who hurt you, you get mad at yourself for not stopping it, for not being different enough, likable enough, tough enough to avoid it. That inward-turned anger can calcify into self-criticism that follows you for decades, a harsh internal voice that sounds suspiciously like the ones that used to follow you down the hallway. Romantic relationships often become the clearest stage where all of this plays out. A partner raises their voice slightly during a disagreement, and suddenly, your whole body is flooded with a level of fear that doesn't match the moment. A partner takes an hour to respond to a text, and your brain immediately jumps to being unwanted, unliked, discarded, the exact fears bullying planted years earlier. You might over-explain yourself constantly, needing reassurance not because your partner is doing anything wrong, but because your nervous system learned long ago that silence and distance often preceded something painful. None of this means you're difficult to love. It means your alarm system is still calibrated to a much harsher environment than the one you're actually in now. The effects don't stay in your head either. Chronic stress from bullying has been linked to real physical consequences: disrupted sleep, weakened immune function, digestive issues, and a nervous system that struggles to fully relax even during rest. Adults who were bullied as children report higher rates of chronic pain and fatigue decades later, not because they're imagining symptoms, but because a body that spent years in fight-or-flight mode doesn't simply forget how to do that. The mind and body were never separate in this story. The hallway didn't just live in your memory, it lived in your muscles, your gut, and your sleep patterns too. This pattern often follows people straight into their careers. Someone who was bullied for their ideas as a kid may grow into an adult who has brilliant ideas in meetings and says none of them out loud because speaking up once made them a target and some part of the brain never updated that rule. Someone who was mocked for trying hard may become an adult who quietly sabotages their own effort, staying just good enough to avoid notice but never good enough to stand out, because standing out is where the old danger lived. Promotions get turned down, Opportunities get avoided, not from lack of ability, but because visibility itself still registers as risk. Understanding this can be strangely relieving. It's not that you lack ambition. It's that ambition, for you, got quietly rewired into something that feels dangerous instead of exciting. Here's a myth worth breaking. People love to say kids are resilient. They'll bounce back. But resilience isn't the absence of impact. It's what happens after impact, and it requires support, safety, and time, not just the passage of years. Studies following bullied children into adulthood consistently find higher rates of anxiety, depression, social anxiety, and even physical health problems decades later. The nervous system doesn't reset itself just because the school hallway is gone. Without intervention, the patterns it builds stay online, quietly running your relationships, your self-talk, and your stress responses for years. Telling a child they'll simply bounce back is a little like telling someone with a sprained ankle to just walk normally, technically possible but painful, and not actually healing anything. And because the effects are often invisible from the outside, a functioning adult, a good job, a normal-looking life, people rarely connect the dots back to a hallway from 20 years ago. The damage doesn't announce itself with a label. It just quietly narrates your relationships, your ambitions, and your self-talk, disguised as who you simply are, when really it's who you were shaped into becoming. But here's the part that matters just as much as the damage. The brain that adapted to threat can also adapt to safety. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, doesn't stop after childhood. It slows down, but it never disappears. Every time you experience real safety in a relationship, every time you practice noticing that a raised voice isn't actually danger, every time you catch yourself people-pleasing and choose to stay steady instead, you're giving your nervous system new evidence to work with. It took years of repetition to build that alarm system. It takes repetition, patience, and often support from therapy or genuinely safe relationships to quiet it back down. This is slow work, not because you're doing it wrong, but because you're asking a system that was trained for years to unlearn its training in a fraction of the time. That's not failure, that's just how rewiring actually works. Concretely, this is why therapy modalities that work directly with the nervous system, not just the thinking mind, tend to help so much with bullying-related patterns. Approaches like somatic therapy or EMDR work with the body's stored stress response, not just the story you tell about what happened, because a lot of this damage isn't stored as a memory you can simply reason your way out of. It's stored as a physical bracing pattern in your shoulders, your jaw, your stomach. Simple practices help too, naming the fear out loud when it shows up. This feels like the hallway, but I'm not in the hallway. Deliberately staying in a calm relationship long enough for your body to register that nothing bad is coming, and noticing again and again the difference between a real threat and an old echo of one. None of this erases what happened. It teaches your nervous system a new baseline to compare it to. You're not broken. You're not overreacting. You're carrying an old survival system into a new world, and understanding that is the first step to teaching it the world has changed. If any of this sounded familiar, that's not a coincidence, and it's not something to be ashamed of. It means your brain did exactly what it was built to do, protect you, using the only tools it had at the time. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. If this helped you understand yourself or someone you care about a little better, do hit subscribe for more videos like this one, and let me know down in the comments which topic you'd like explained next.